Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Well, welcome to Relationships Inside Out, where today we're going to talk about navigating political stress with family, with friends.
This is going to be a tough one.
Not ideal strangers.
People joke about context. So in the United States right now, we are going through a lot of political changes with a new president, with even state governing boards. We're going through a lot of changes. So political stress for some people is relatively high. And we joke often of like the topics you don't bring up at Thanksgiving dinner. This is one of them.
Yes. And people still do.
They do.
There's a lot of relationship cutoff because of political differences.
Oh, yeah.
So family members won't be talking to the other family members because they don't see eye to eye on the political stuff. I mean, this is a big topic or stressor for family. So, or friends. I mean, people cut off friends.
Oh, yeah. Make shit go awry real quick.
But the fascinating piece for me as a family therapist is how we cut off family for this.
It's insane that just because of our differences, and don't get me wrong, some of the differences are huge, right? If we talk about, say, like a big one is abortion.
Yeah.
And it becomes this conversation of how can I be in friendship, kinship with someone who holds a different belief about the rights of babies or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so I hear the value of it and the fact that it becomes so charged, so divisive that we can cut off what could be decades old relationships is profound.
And it's really a balance of values in my perspective. Like if my political value supersedes my value of family, or I value kind of my own well-being, that it's important for me not to be around this person because they are of a perspective that does not align with my values, or it's really just trying to understand where your values are and if it's important to allow something like that to dissipate or change because of certain belief systems.
And where that line is, because the reality is you're not going to surround yourself with people who believe all the same things you do, right? Inherently, we're going to have different beliefs with the people around us, or at least I actually hope so for you, right? For anybody.
Yeah.
Because it challenges us. It challenges us to consider other perspectives, to think about things differently, to approach the world different than just our one way.
That's the problem that we have as humans is differences cause dissonance or stress.
Truth.
And the more different something is and challenges our belief system, it causes a lot of stress. So there are, and I look at this as a spectrum. There's people who cannot take any sign of anything that's different, completely shut it down, aren't willing to hear because it causes too much stress. Then you have other people who are willing to like learn and be open and like, what does that mean? And there is a spectrum in there.
Truth.
And where we fall is interesting because the amount of dissonance or stress that we experience because something is challenging our worldview or belief system is going to determine how we react or respond.
Fair.
But the question for me is, why is that causing you dissonance? Why does an alternate view or perspective cause that? Like, what does that mean?
Why does it arise such a big part of you, right? I can have a different perspective than my friend. And how do I say like, okay, she just has a different perspective versus she's a bad person because she has a different perspective?
Oh, she is.
I mean, I am right all the time. But it's hard. It's hard because some of these really do call it our core beliefs, whether it's our faith or human rights or financial rights, whatever it might be. And how do we hold those differences while also still loving someone, while also still appreciating other parts about them?
But it goes back to that values. Like, do I value this person more than this political belief system? That might not be. And a lot of times if you hear the conversation, which when you're in it is hard to do, they're not so opposing or they're not so diverse that it would suggest that much stress or dissonance that you're experiencing is necessary.
Truth.
So something is triggering, right? Like something feels off about someone not believing what we believe. And, when we think about the psychology of in-group, out-group bias, right? As humans, we typically fall into these categories regardless, unconsciously. So the more you identify with a group, the more likely you are not to take any outside influence. And the more extreme you become, the more defensive and the more you're willing to fight for this group, right? So the more your identity is ingrained in this, and you see this in politics, religion, sports teams, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, people kill each other over sports games.
It's insane.
And a lot of it comes from the psychology of in-group, out-group bias, right? So in-group, everyone's good. Like if they do anything bad, it's okay. It's very minimized.
We have each other's back. We're loyal, fiercely loyal.
And if someone does in the out-group something bad, even if it's the same thing on the same level as someone in the in-group, it's extreme. It's, they need to like something bad really needs to happen to them.
We see this with bad sportsmanship. We see this with all kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
From our team, it's okay if our team loses and I'm a bad sport and I do something reckless.
Yeah.
But if the other side does, they're a bunch of assholes.
Well, I think about it as like, the Houston Astros or the New England Patriots both got caught for cheating. The people who are fans of those teams are like, oh, you know what? Everyone does it. It's okay. And then the outgroups are like, you need to be completely banned from sports, right? Like, it's just like this complete opposite spectrum. And it goes to how
But if it was reversed, they would hold the other groups accountable, which is the fascinating part of it.
Yeah. And so if it was reversed, they would be the outgroup and being like, nope, you need to be banned from sports.
100.
Everyone wanted to ban us, so you're banned now. And we engage in this in the political, since we're talking about that today, and the in-group, out-group, and in the United States, it's predominantly a dichotomy, unfortunately, right? This two choice, it's red, blue, right? Democratic versus Republican. And you see this in conversations and a lot of families being separated because of these extreme views. I mean, they'll start fighting as if like yelling is going to get your point across and I'm going to make you believe. Here's the thing is a lot of times our conversation with somebody isn't going to create change right away. You might plant the seed, but nothing is that serious that you're going to be influencing change that they're going to be like, yep, you're right. I'm ripping up my thing. I'm going to now
switch groups.
Switch groups. Like that's just not reality. So what is your intention of trying to get this across? Are you fighting and defending this stress you feel because someone doesn't share that belief?
And I wonder if part of it is them not sharing a belief implies that I am wrong or implies that I am not seen. And it's actually more of like an ego hit, right? Than anything, because it's a reflection of, well, what do they now think of me?
Yeah.
Are my beliefs right? Or what do I think of them because their beliefs aren't quote unquote right? Right? If they don't agree with me on whatever policy, do I look down on them for that? Do I see them as less competent, less ethical, less whatever it might be?
Yeah. And we're talking about this in the context of politics, but this in-group, out-group dynamics span so many things. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about parenting and the mom groups and how there's groups of certain styles. And if you don't agree with that style, like you're a bad parent. Like it's fascinating as how us humans fall into this. And we're not immune to this as therapists either.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
and we have our own biases, right?
Yeah, MFTs are the best. What's up? Marriage family therapist.
Specifically me.
No one else should see families or couples except for marriage family therapist. That's my in-group bias.
And earlier you said something, and it's a little word, but it's profound. Democrats versus Republicans. That's how things are portrayed, especially in our culture, is that verse, not Democrats and. And there are certain cultures, states, cities within the United States where they're predominantly one or the other. Say, typically in the South, they tend to be more Republican. If I were to go and be like, I'm a Democrat, people might literally cause property damage. They might turn their back on me. They might judge me, ostracize me, bully my children.
Yeah.
It's to that extreme, right? And we see it the other way too. That's not me dogging on Republicans at all.
Yeah.
We see it both directions, depending on where you are in the country. And it's become so divisive for the US that it's mind-blowing to me. It has the ability to ruin marriages. It has the ability to ruin families, to ruin friendships. Yeah. It's insane to me.
And what's even more, I guess, around this is that nothing is that simple that one group has it all together to be the panacea or like the right kind of like, this is the only way, like there's no other way.
Totally correct. No.
There's too much diversity and variability in what's going on and context and what's happening in the world at the time. And no one group could ever have it all to like make up for what's happening. And the thing that happens most in this that I think is a huge problem is what we call confirmation bias. So when we're in the in-group, we look to confirm our own bias of why our group's right. And unfortunately, the media is set up this way to help really stimulate these confirmation biases. So you get tracked to these certain stations because
Fox versus CNN versus ABC.
They speak to your belief systems. And when they speak to your belief systems, that means less stress. But when you go and look at an alternative, it causes more stress.
But they're wrong. They're stupid. They don't know.
Yeah.
We know, but they don't know.
And as long as we engage in confirmation bias, we'll never, I shouldn't say never, that's very extreme, but we'll most likely have a very difficult time of ever having a healthy conversation, because we're not willing to see another perspective, which I think is limiting. I think it's emotionally immature. Let's just, to be frank, is that important? But again, like, that's speaking from my own value system, what's important. If that's really high up on someone's value system, maybe that is why it's to that extreme. Now, how do we navigate that? How do we navigate these differences when you can't necessarily maybe avoid in-laws or things like that at family gatherings, right?
It's tough. And how do I not, and some families would say they should, but for me, how do I not impose those, excuse me, those beliefs on my children? Some families would argue I should impose those beliefs on my children because that will make them a good citizen person. And I'm of the camp, I want my kids to really kind of figure out what is their belief system, even if it's not in total alignment with mine.
Yeah.
So how do we as a family navigate that? This is hard. That's where this political stress comes from. Not just the outcome of the race, but how is this going to impact my family? Yeah. How do I sit across from people who are different than me? How do I parent my kids in light of this? How is it going to impact my finance? You name it. Yeah.
And a word that we use in a lot of our episodes is boundaries. And this is where we have to decide what those boundaries look like. And kind of what you just talked about a little bit is, how do I allow it to influence my child? Those are boundaries we need to set up based on when we decide what that looks like. So if we're wanting them to gain multiple perspectives, we would put boundaries around what messages are being said by family, right? Are they criticizing a certain party? So now my child has this narrative that that party's bad.
Right. Like we try to, or I try to really encourage factual information, right? So my family leans one way, my husband's family leans the complete opposite way. So you put them in a room, they just do not agree politically, and that's okay. I don't mind that my daughter hears the disagreement, but I want her to hear factual information, not just, well, that party is wrong or stupid, or, you know, the critical piece that has no factual basis.
Oh, can I throw a wrench in this?
Oh gosh, what you got?
This is why it's so complex. So part of tactics that people do with the in-group is things that help dismiss what you call facts. And you'll hear fake news is very popular, right?
It's true.
And this is why my default is just understand you'll never, sorry, I should stop using that. Just recognize or be okay or accept the fact that it's going to be very, very difficult to ever change somebody, and you only have control over what you are going through or feel or whatever it might be, your beliefs.
Sure.
There's a lot of effort and energy put into trying to influence someone else's belief. And when you get tactics like fake news in there, that completely dismisses anything. We have no obligation to listen now, because it's just, in air quotes, if someone can't see me when they're hearing on the radio, but it's fake news.
And by factual, I don't even mean like totally cemented in evidence-based facts, but here's what one party thinks, here's what one party thinks. We can talk about it that way.
Yes.
What I can't have is, because they think this way, you're a piece of shit. Like that extra little bit at the end, I won't have in front of my kids.
Yeah.
And that's a boundary for me, right? So finding your boundaries.
Yeah.
Some people's boundaries are, they will only know this political side. They will only know that abortion is okay or not okay. And that's it, right? My boundaries, beliefs are a little different. I want them to suss out both sides and figure out what aligns with them and their body.
Yeah. And the boundary might be where you respect this person enough, but we're not going to talk about politics because it just is not going well, how they bring it up for my kids. So that could be possible.
It's a no topic.
There's a lot of difference, or a lot of variation what these boundaries can look like. And you have to figure out what that is going to be, especially because, let's just be real, if someone's going to just say everything that you say is fake news because that's their defense mechanism for wanting to hear an alternative perspective because it causes too much stress for them to sit and listen to an alternative perspective, is it worth even having that conversation? Is it worth your energy? Is it, I mean, you're talking to a wall here. It's kind of like when in relationships, when people are in conflict, don't talk, take a time out, come back when you're regulated.
Truth.
Right? You have to be grounded to have these conversations, and say you do want to have these conversations. It's valuable to you to share and be open about your belief system, and that's a value of yours. how do we do it in a soft way that does not elicit defensiveness on such a triggering and sensitive topic?
And this is just my own personal stance. If you want to be heard, you have to also listen. And so the idea of,
No,
I'm just going
listen to me. What I say is more important. Everything you say is fake news.
The idea that people do this, they soapbox, right?
Yeah.
You're going to hear me. But then when someone tries to talk back to them or rebuttal in any way, nope, won't hear it. And to me, that's bullshit. If you're going to share your beliefs, preach your beliefs, you also have to be open to what's the other perspective.
And that's reciprocity.
Yes.
And that's another boundary. If you're talking with someone about something that's valuable to you and you're not getting reciprocity and being heard because they're too defensive or are too closed because of they're protecting that feeling because it's so uncomfortable, is it worth having this conversation? Is it worth, and this is where boundaries come up. Do I see and respect them in different contexts, or is it just in general not worth having this relationship?
And that can be a tough line, right? I hold friendships that some align with me politically, some don't. My husband and I don't even fully align, if I'm being honest, politically. So how do we hold space for that? For me, I can acknowledge that. I cannot love that, right? I cannot love that there are some differences there, and I can still love that person.
Yeah.
But if there were people that were really extreme from my current beliefs and they embodied it in all that they did, maybe I wouldn't choose a relationship with them, a friendship with them.
Or to a certain degree. Maybe
Sure.
it's just around a certain context of like my kids are in sports with them and we talk about that and I'm not going to engage in anything
Keep it
else.
real light.
Yeah.
But in any case, it's worth being said, like not bringing these up at family functions, holidays, the things, if you think it's a ticking time bomb, timing and context are crucial here. That can be part of your boundaries of, we can have this conversation, you and me, coffee, whatever it might be, but we're not going to have it at Jimmy's 4th birthday party.
Yeah.
We're not doing that.
And if it's somebody like on Facebook, social media is a big platform for people to share their belief system. If it's somebody throwing out like anti one party or the other and showing facts that are completely diminish any credibility of like a candidate or something, it's probably not somebody you want to engage with in the first place if they're willing to go to that extent of sharing something that extreme. Like, so just sitting back and looking at everything and trying to observe it before you engage and understanding where your values are important too.
Observing openly and with curiosity, not just condemnation, right? But to your point with social media, that's another boundary. There are people that I've discovered, I'm going to go and hit that unfollow, unfriend, mute button.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I have to mute them forever, but until January, I would like to say November, but Lord knows it doesn't end in November, I might mute them because I don't want to see the flash of their political views every time I log into Facebook when I'm trying to just check out and doom scroll, right? Which isn't good anyway. But it's okay to have boundaries, right? Maybe in this season of life, when politics are high, there are certain people I see less. Maybe I'll engage with them again after January. Maybe I won't. But my boundaries are mine. I think that's, to your point, what's crucial here is the way I might define my boundaries might be different than yours, Greg. Different than my husband's, different than my in-laws, whatever it might be.
I mean, you and your husband, for those listening, they paint one side of the house red, the other blue. That's not, I'm just kidding.
It's facts. Our families, I'm more in the middle. My husband is not in the middle. And our families are super dichotomous. Like they definitely are not middle. And it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
And so we engage in it very carefully, right? Like I'm not going to bring up politics to my husband when we're tired, when we're hungry, when we're hot, when there's other people around.
Those are the best times. What are you talking
about? Oh my golly.
That's best times for viewership if you want popcorn to watch. So one boundary I will say that I don't think is healthy is putting boundaries of not engaging with people or having them in your life because their belief system causes you discomfort.
Say more.
I don't think because you feel uncomfortable, you have to put a boundary on something to protect or not feel that. That to me is avoidance. Now, if you put a boundary around something because somebody's violating a value system of yours, that's different. But having distress and not being tolerable of that is not an excuse to avoid things necessarily. And I mean, there's even unfortunately therapeutic modalities out there that talk about that. And I'm not of that camp, right? My in-group would say that it's best that we learn skills to be able to tolerate distress so we can still maintain relationships, even if they make us feel uncomfortable for a certain degree. But they don't always have to make us feel uncomfortable, depending on how much power we give that. And so putting a boundary up of like, oh, their beliefs are so different than us, we're not going to hang out with them. Is that their whole identity? Is that belief system? You know, for some, maybe. I mean, maybe, right? They got all the banners outside and
Lord Jesus
stickers on their trucks or whatever. I don't know.
I can't. But human rights is a big one, right? So when we talk about politics, a big sector of that is human rights. And I have clients who do actively cut people off because they believe something different about human rights, whether it is about LGBTQ or abortion or access to care, whatever it might be. Because someone believes something significantly divergent from what they believe on human rights, they might choose to cut them off because human rights is such a core to them. I support that, right? But if it's just because you don't agree with me, I don't like you, I can't get on board with that. There's a nuanced difference there, right? One is core value. One is I'm just judging you because you don't agree with me.
And that begs the question of what's the substance of this relationship in the first place?
True.
So there might not be a lot of substance there.
True.
And it's hard because even if that is a belief, at the end of the day, like, so look about all the previous years that we've gotten conflict and cut people off because of political beliefs. Would it have mattered 20 years later? Would it?
No.
Would have all the things that certain parties have done because that's what you believe and that, you know, their party did something else, like, would it have mattered at the end of the day?
See, but then there's this argument where yes, maybe it could have, right?
It could.
Like, again, I hate to keep going back to abortion, but think Roe v. Wade here.
Oh, yeah.
That one, I'm thinking about specific clients right now in my brain where because some people supported what happened with Roe v. Wade and some people did not, they chose to cut them off. And because it did have an impact that will impact us 20 years from now for me, like I have girls, what states can my girls live in with freedom of choice? Where can't they? And this is not a political discussion on abortion, but it gets at the core of values.
Yep. Goes back to the value system.
Yep. And so I can see that part. Like there are some that do have pretty consequential outcomes of 20, 30 years from now.
And I don't think what we're saying is one decision is right or wrong, except for the idea that you put a boundary up because it's uncomfortable.
Sure.
This is for you to decide. What is your value system? Is that decision of what they chose on that Roe v. Wade important enough for you to cut them off? Fine. That's okay. But if not, I mean, this is where we're talking about how to navigate this. And it really starts with assessing your values, their role in your life outside of political stuff. Like what other thing do they bring and value do they bring to you? Or maybe not just to you, but to your kids or other people in your family. So evaluating this holistically and not allowing the differences in such, you know, conflictual context like politics to rule this. And then if not, learning how to have effective communication skills to not bring up or elicit defensiveness, right? So no you language, no pointing fingers, try to like watch your tone, validate their perspective. I can see why you feel that way. That would make sense where you're coming from in your experience of why.
Even if you don't agree, validation does not mean I agree.
Yeah.
It means I hear you.
Yes.
That's it.
And that's important. There's a lot of tactics that we can use to help mitigate this and have a very fruitful conversation. But if we start engaging in communication or language that elicits defensiveness, again, you language or blaming or, you know, in politics, this is very common and maybe even religion, but politics in particular, I notice it is like you pick out all the reasons why the other party's wrong, right? Because you're trying to influence this person's decision and all you're doing is invalidating them and feeling like their decision's wrong. That's going to lead to defensiveness. Or it may be not even decision. Maybe this is part of their identity. So now their identity is wrong if they have such a investment in this political party. And that's not grounds for a healthy conversation. People are allowed to have differences and you're allowed to also have conversations about it.
And agree to disagree. Conversation does not mean we're going to end on the same page. Set the goal for the conversation. The goal is I'm going to listen.
If I can learn one thing.
Facts.
That would be a great goal versus no, they need to hear me so I can feel validated in my perspective. Otherwise, this is uncomfortable.
And I'm going to change your mind.
Those aren't good goals.
Nope.
But going in there with curiosity and trying to understand why they believe it, even if you leave not agreeing, maybe you'll learn something.
Or why you get so riled. If you're noticing a physiological reaction yourself, get curious. What is activating in me that I am getting so angry
Yeah.
in this conversation?
Yeah. And it could be something larger, like this individual and how they're talking just represents all the people that make me lose faith in humanity, right? It might be something extreme
Sure.
like that, but just being aware, and maybe that's what you learn from that. I want to learn something about myself and how I'm responding to this. Maybe that's what you gain. But with the goal of being curious and trying to learn, whether it's curious about yourself or the other person's perspective, that is a better goal that sets kind of, I think, a road for success and having a fruitful conversation rather than trying to prove your point.
Introspection, right? Is this triggering me from how my parents used to be? Is this triggering of an old partner? Do I actually believe the party I'm standing up for? Do I believe everything that they believe in, or do I just believe parts of it? Why do I believe those things? Get curious with yourself. Be critical of yourself rather than just the opposing person. Even as I say opposing person, isn't that crazy? Like that language is indoctrinated into this conversation of we are opposing.
And what's fascinating is that a couple of things here. One is if you're in the in group, you do a lot more work to understand what's happening in your party and why they're right? Confirmation bias again. And we do a lot more effort on the other side to see why they're wrong. But we don't share that same effort of why the other person might have a valid perspective and where they're coming from and why this is a value of theirs. How are you ever expected to have a balanced perspective if you don't give anything opposing, well, in your view, opposing a chance?
If you don't consider outside of your own view. So with the political stress, so we've talked about boundaries and communication. I also want to talk about self, right? If I know these political spheres, this time of election stresses me out, how am I taking care of myself, regardless of the conversations with other people? Am I still viewing the news at the same volume? Or maybe I turn it off. Am I, this sounds weird, but like pre-recording my shows so that I can fast forward through the commercials? Am I taking more time for self-care, getting out in nature, turning off my phone, turning off my computer, right? The things we need to help regulate our body in what is a potentially very stressful season of life. And so it's important to think about, how am I also regulating myself with all the stress that's buzzing around?
Yeah. And kind of what you're speaking to, I think, and I appreciate, is this idea that politics isn't our identity.
No.
It could be a part of us, but it's not all of us. And especially during this season of elections, we tend to bring that part of us out in a big way, and we neglect other parts of ourselves. And that balance is very important. Like, that's one part of you. If it's a stressful part and now a big part of you in this context, you're going to experience more stress. But what else are you doing to take care of yourself? What other parts are you nurturing and giving attention to?
How am I nurturing my relationships outside of that? Okay, my husband and I don't agree, but how can I nurture our relationship regardless of what he writes down on his ballot?
I mean, it's limited with the resentment you might have.
Oh, so resentment.
Oh my God.
But how do we give ourselves the space from politics? How do we give ourselves room to heal, room to process, room to check the fuck out?
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it. Like, sometimes we feel like we have to be so informed that we overinvest in this so we don't miss any data. That sometimes comes at a cost. Is it worth the cost to you of burning yourself out by November? Again, United States for November. By November, or is it not?
And destroying relationships, and
And how's that going to impact the holidays that are just a few weeks later? Like,
I know we have political differences, but I'd really love this new oven.
I like your turkey, so can you still come? It's just, it's just crazy to me, right? And for some people, turning it off isn't an option. For me, I am one of the first to turn it off because I know it dysregulates me.
Yeah.
It pisses me off. And then I'm pissed off at my kids. I'm pissed off at my husband. I'm not a good therapist. And it has this profound ripple impact.
Yeah.
To everyone around me because I'm an asshole and I just make everyone else suffer because I'm suffering. It's fine. But if I know that about myself, I am responsible for my behavior. I'm responsible for my mood. I'm responsible for my self-protection. So I have to do the things. It's not up to my husband and kids to tiptoe around my mood because I'm crabby that I watch the news all day.
Or it's not responsibility. It's not responsibility of other people to agree with you so you feel better.
Facts.
And it's your responsibility of how much control you allow these things to have over you.
Truth. You're in control of only you. You're not in control of other people and their beliefs or their behavior or their mood or reactions or what name they write down.
When we're talking about having this conflict and going to the holidays, I was just thinking of another kind of example would be, guns, anti-gun. Hey, I know you hunt. Can you bring deer over for the
I can't. And it's a tough one. That is another
Can you bring
hot button
pheasant
issue.
over that you've killed? But I hate guns, by the way.
I can't. It's another hot button issue.
It is, yeah.
And rightfully so, right? I have some friends who have guns in their home and some who don't. How do I fall on one side. I'm not going to say which, but I fall on one side. How do I still love people that have a different view or who might judge me for my belief? How do I create room for that? It's tough.
Yeah, and based on what I said earlier of like, it's hard to identify to one, like in the context of politics, in one party to that extent, because I don't believe that there's one panacea.
Agreed.
There's a hard time with people haven't been around me and having conversations because I'm not very invested in any one idea. Like I love the idea of multiple things and how they would play out and what this would look like and how would it look like in the context of what we're going through in the world globally too. Mm-hmm. And that sometimes isn't okay, depending on someone's beliefs, because you're not agreeing with them. You're too in the middle, or you're too
gray.
You're too gray. And so again, is it worth it? What are your values? Like for me, I value mine is if someone's too extreme, that's not people I can be around.
Correct. I agree with you there.
I don't
in either direction. I want to be really clear. Either direction.
And not even just politics, anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Too extreme to the point that they're dismissive. You can be extreme and also curious. You can be extreme and not put down other people's perspectives. Difference. It's how you handle it. Right. So it's not just anybody's extreme. It's how you handle that. Mm-hmm. Because I'm looking for emotional maturity. Mm-hmm. I'm looking for somebody that I can feel safe to have this conversation around and explore and not get attacked or criticized or try to be persuaded. Mm-hmm. I want open conversations, and those can't typically exist with those traits. And that's just acceptance on my part. Like, unfortunately, I just can't have that. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that I completely cut them off. It depends on who they are in my life, the substance, like what substance I have in the relationship, and mm-hmm. How they impact my family as a whole, not just me, mm-hmm. and maybe in some positive ways. So,
and it can ebb and flow, right? Just like any relationship. I liken it to a train. Everyone has a train throughout life, and certain passengers get on and certain ones get off. Some might be on your train the entire time, right? Like ideally, my husband's gonna be on my train for the rest of my life. Maybe, right? But there are friendships that have gotten on my train, have been really close to me, and then have exited my train. Seasons like political stress may have passengers leaving your train, but you might also get new passengers on your train. Being open to the positive effects of this too is really important here, not just the negative.
As long as those passengers don't lead to you being in a cult, those new passengers.
Oh my gosh, Greg. Could you imagine me trying to be in a cult? No.
You'd be the leader there.
Probably. This is why chocolate is the best food ever. Cold.
And I think if we think about what we've talked about, is really understand your value system and how important politics are. Understand the role of politics in your relationships with certain individuals, not everyone, how they play out. Consider how you talk about it and bring it up, and your responsibility to talk about it in a way that does not elicit defensiveness in the best capacity you have. Evaluating in a more curious way of these relationships, and that is politics and that person's view enough to end that relationship, or diverge kind of this trajectory you perceived in some way, and what boundaries are important to you and how these things influence your life and your family. Mm-hmm. And importantly is reflecting on yourself as how much of the boundaries you're setting are due to your inability to tolerate distress, mm-hmm. and like being uncomfortable versus, no, this is not good for my well-being because of the differences in their inability to kind of have reciprocity.
Sure. And how are you taking care of yourself?
Yeah. Political
stress has the ability to really stress people out. You get to choose what stress walks in sometimes, not all the time. But with this one, you get to choose the level of engagement. Choose it. Choose to take space if you need it. Choose to engage when you want to. Not because you have to, not because you're told to, when you want to, mm-hmm. right? Choose to bow out, choose to unfollow, choose whatever it is for you that is going to help bring down your stress at this time. Mm-hmm. We're going into the season of fall. Moods already get really shitty with fall and winter. We know that. Plus then political stress, plus whatever stress you're already going through in life. Know your boundaries, know your limits, and advocate for those, but also know your self-care. Practice that self-care every single day.
And I'd also argue that part of self-care is reflecting on how open you are to other perspectives.
Sure.
And I think what happens here is if you're not open to other perspectives, you're kind of holding on to what you believe in, and there's fear of these other perspectives being introduced. And being open doesn't mean that you're being non-committal to your party or whatever, or you're violating kind of your membership. But being open and learning about this other side, and then being confident in your decision after that, becomes more about, this is actually just what I believe, versus like a fear response.
Truth. And even to that point, right? If you have 5 Democrats or 5 Republicans sitting in the room, those 5 people are still going to have differing beliefs. Just because they belong to one party doesn't mean that they totally align on every single facet. Know your beliefs. You can still claim your party if that's important to you, while also holding your own thoughtful, introspective beliefs.
Yeah. And I think one important piece we talked about that I didn't mention in the sum is think about your goal going into conversations, not being about trying to persuade somebody, not trying to influence their belief systems, but to be curious, open, and to learn something, whether that's from their perspective or about yourself, hearing a different perspective.
Well, this has been Relationships Inside Out, where today we touched on political stress. Politics has the ability to be incredibly disruptive if we let it, right? As always, if anyone has any feedback, topic suggestions, please feel free to email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks.